Welcome to the Vampire Chronicles spoiler discussion video. This video was originally going to go up last week, but there was some muck-ups with the audio and it was too much of a hassle to deal with, so in the end I postponed it a week. So if you want to remain updated of when stuff like that happens, so schedule changes or whatever, make sure you follow me on my Twitter or Facebook, either one linked in the description below. So, spoilers. I know it says so in the title, but I have to say it anyways. Spoilers in this video for literally anything and everything in the series. I'm going to focus on very specific topics, but my thoughts are going to be off the cuff and completely random, so there's a chance that if you have not completed reading the series before watching this video, that I might say something that you might not have learned about yet. So if you haven't finished reading the entire Vampire Chronicles series, all 15 books, including the 2 books in the New Tales of the Vampires, don't watch this video. For the rest of you, if you've read all the books or you don't give a shit about spoilers, let's continue on. First, I want to talk about Claudia. This is not a surprise, but I think the first real shock of the series was the death of Claudia and how it came about. You know, like, I'm pretty sure I watched the movie Interview with a Vampire before I read the book. The book was actually one of the last books in the series that I actually read, because I read most of them out of order, at least the first time around. And it's not the same kind of shock when you already know about it, but it's still surprising because, you know, Claudia is physically a child, even though she's been a vampire for several decades at that point. And I don't know, Armand claims that he couldn't have made an influence on Claudia's fate, but he could with Louis. I don't know, like, he was the master of the Théâtre des Vampires, so I don't really know if he was being truthful or not. We know that he's always loved Louis, and he probably allowed that to happen to Claudia because of the fact that he loved Louis and he saw Claudia as competition, perhaps. I really did like the fact, though, that later on in the series, in the book Merrick, there's a bit of reconciliation with Louis and Claudia. Merrick implies that it wasn't really the spirit of Claudia that came in, that it was a spirit that took on Claudia's form based on what Louis already knew, that because it was a spirit, it was being deceptive and trying to manipulate him. We don't really know which way it was actually going, but at the very least, by the end of Merrick, Louis has finally come to terms with the death of Claudia, and he's able to start moving on from it, which is nice. Sometimes I still wonder what the rest of the Vampire Chronicles would be, though, if Claudia was still around. You know? Akasha. So at first, we didn't know for sure whether it was Akasha or her husband Enkil who were the first vampires. I think a lot of us assumed before we knew that it was Enkil first and Akasha was he made Akasha into a vampire, but it was actually the reverse. And we find that out primarily due to the fact that Akasha is the one who completely drains Enkil of all his blood, everything he had, to free herself from him, and then in turn rise up and go after Lestat in The Queen of the Damned. So, and really, Akasha brought it all on herself. Oh, such a bitch. Like, she had stuff coming to her. Not a nice person. And the fact that when Lestat woke her up and, you know, she abducted him and she was like, oh, this is my vision for the world, and just she really just wanted to rule over everything the way she wanted it to be done. She did it under the guise of feminism and protecting women, but really she was a tyrant. She was a bloody tyrant. And, you know, first vampire or not, it was good that she got dealt with sooner rather than later, because, like, I don't think there really would have been another opportunity for that. At least none that I can think of. And then there was the emotional manipulation she tried to do on Lestat as well, where it's like, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but I do know she was claiming that she loved him, that she cared about him, that she wanted him to be her harbinger, her representative of the male population in her new world. God, that woman was so delusional. And clearly not very well up in here. Like, she wanted to believe she was a god. And she found out the hard way that wasn't the case. I want to touch on the body thief thing for a moment. Mostly because, I mean, I'm just going to say it, my opinion on The Tale of the Body Thief, still not a great book. I still think it's at most a 2-star book, not any more than that. But in my opinion, what saves that book from complete obscurity is the fact that it's great character development for David Talbot, right? That pretty much the only reason for that book to exist, more or less, was for David Talbot, which is a shame, really, when you consider the book is primarily about Lestat, of course. But, you know, there are some things about Lestat's temporary adventures in a human body that are okay. Like, it was interesting to experience his how trying to move as a human and trying to get used to drinking regular liquids and eating regular food, and that dude ended up in the hospital. Like, it's some nasty stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that happened in that book that was all because Lestat really didn't learn his lesson from the Queen of the Damned. And, you know, it had its moments, but that's the one thing that will always keep it as a mediocre book for me. I mean, but in the end, you know, David Talbot was turned into a vampire in a new body. The body, willingly. Vampire, unwillingly. But most of the vampires in the series that we know and love were not really willing subjects anyways. So, I mean, not the most ideal scenario, but not exactly out the ordinary either. This part, I think, is the one that's probably gonna rile up the most people. And not just because it's well known that I don't like Memnoch the Devil. That book, okay? I don't like the retcon that Anne Rice made later on in the series. Memnoch is not the devil. He is not a fallen angel. He is not connected to God anyway. He did not take Lestat to heaven or hell, past, present, whatever. It was all a lie. It was all a ruse. According to, I think, Chapter 2 of Prince Lestat and the Realms of Atlantis, when Grampt and Lestat are talking, and Grampt reveals that Memnoch was just a very powerful and dangerous spirit that took advantage of Lestat's weakened mental state and just ran with it to try and manipulate him, to try and break him. I almost wish he never touched it anymore. I'll be honest. I would have preferred just leaving it the way that book was and not having done anything else. On one hand, I'm glad she's not completely ignoring it, but I mean, I know part of the reason why she chose to retcon it, okay? Because we know the Vampire Chronicles is one of those rare instances where the series has been going on long enough and was occurring during specific times in the author's life that they were going through periods of transition in terms of where their life was at, what they believed. And during the time of when Anne Rice wrote Memnoch the Devil, she was hardcore into Catholicism. So, at the time she wrote Prince Lestat and the Realms of Atlantis, and Blood Communion, she was not anymore into that, and had more or less come to realize her own personal beliefs about spirits, God, the world, the universe, and so on. So I do believe that retcon she probably felt was necessary as a way of bringing it around more to how she currently believes in stuff. But, oh man, if you are one of those people who read Memnoch the Devil, and you loved it because of its Christian themology and what it was trying to do, I personally, if I were you, I would be mad at that retcon. I would be super angry. I was already not pleased when I read about it because it made me feel like that book was even more of a waste than I already feel it is. Like, if I didn't think it belonged before, I really don't think it belongs now. And, like, I appreciate the effort on her part, but she might as well have just left it alone, man. And then we have the two books in which the Vampire Chronicles and the Lives of the Mayfair Witches crossed. Blackwood Farm and Blood Canticle. And they were okay books. I like that it did at least bring to the end the whole mystery of the Tautos. What happened to them, where they ended up. I suppose the one thing I was surprised about, though, was that with the three newer books, that there was literally no references to the Mayfairs or the Tautos or anything at all. The only references there were to Mona and Quinn, because, you know, they're Quinn is like a brother to Lestat, and Mona is his fledgling, right? And that's about it. So that was a little bit disappointing, but not too surprising. Because, you know, after those two books, the story of the Mayfairs is, for all intents and purposes, over. There isn't anything else to add to it. So, one of the things I wasn't too certain about whether I wanted to hear about it or not was the truth about the founding of the Talamasca and about certain powerful spirits, alright? Like, the fact that the Talamasca was founded by a couple of spirits in a human-like form, and then Tascaman, I can't remember exactly which, who is a vampire, right? And originally, the Talamasca was founded to keep track of the vampires in the world, because at the time there was no other way to track the vampires, because they were all solitary or in very small groups, and it was very difficult to collect a history, to keep an eye on them as a whole. But with the events that occurred in the most recent 3 books in the series, that was no longer necessary, right? So, on the upside, the Talamasca is no longer going to be going after the vampires, because now suddenly they believe they don't exist. By the same token, it's like, I would have been perfectly fine if they just left the Talamasca out of it completely. Like, I feel like it was way more of a thing in the earlier times of the series. I suppose they had to bring a kind of closure to it at some point, though, because they were still very much a thing in Merrick and some of the other later books, so there's that. At least it wasn't completely ignored. But I didn't really feel like we needed to hear about how they were founded, what their origin truly was. You know what I mean? Amell. Huh. Okay, so this is another one of those things that, like the Talamasca and like the truth about Memnoch, probably would have been better left unsaid. I mean, I knew when reading Prince Lestat and about the vampires who could hear this voice, that was compelling them to kill the younger ones. I knew already that it could have been Amell, because who else would it be, right? Because Macaire is mute, she doesn't talk, her brain barely functions, so it definitely wasn't her. But Amell was clearly feeling captive inside her because she wasn't really registering anything, wasn't really doing anything. So, he was stretched thin and something had to be done. I don't like the fact that Maharin and Macaire had to die in order for things to happen the way they did. But by the same token, Lestat was able to take Amell and the core into himself and allowed Amell to be able to properly see, properly hear, properly experience things the way he wanted to, the way he should have been doing. And, I thought that was the end to the revelations. But then we had Prince Lestat in the realms of Atlantis, and we discovered that Amell had an existence before all of this. That he was manipulated and experimented upon by the same creatures that created the Replomoids, which I'll tackle in a bit. And he originally was the master of Atlantis. He's the one who created the city. And when he died, he became a spirit in whatever realm the spirits go to. That it's like a purgatory between Earth and Heaven or something, which is where Gremt originally met Amell. And all the stuff that happened with that. So it's okay, but I don't feel it's another one of those things where I feel we didn't really need that kind of information. The books were all written well, so it's like, I can't say I didn't enjoy reading the books, because I did. Even the books that I don't like in the series, I still enjoyed reading them. But I just didn't think it was necessary. I would have been perfectly fine with Amell just being a spirit that just happened to be bloodthirsty and just happened to be, with Akasha at the right moment to fuse with her body and become the first vampire or whatever. Atalantea, aka Atlantis, and the Replomoids. It was a neat idea. I will say that. When I first heard about the book, and when I heard it was trying to connect Atlantis to the existence of the vampires, I wasn't sure how that would go. Again, in the end, it was all about the connection with Amell, right? But it was definitely interesting. I kind of almost feel like the whole Atlantis story could have been a thing on its own. Kind of like what happened in Memnoch the Devil, It's like, it would have been a good thing as its own thing, not connected to the Vampire Chronicles. Connected to the Vampire Chronicles is a whole different thing altogether. It was very interesting how it came about. And, the Replomoids being very innocent at first due to their programming and all that jazz. And then through Amell and through the other people of Atalantea, they learn that their creators are not so benevolent and actually relish in torture. And, they feed off of that torture of humanity on Earth and stuff like that. We don't know exactly where this creator species of the Replomoids is. Could very well be somewhere else in our solar system, somewhere else in the galaxy. And then there's the thing that, where are they now? Even the Replomoids don't even know where their former masters are and whether they're going to come back. It's assumed that they haven't done anything since they destroyed Atlantis. But it's not like they needed to, because humanity has already been engaging in a lot of war and murder and torture on its own without their assistance, more or less. On the upside, they managed to separate Amell from Lestat, and that meant there was no more core that bound all the vampires together. And while the vampires could be sired under the normal circumstances, there was no risk of everyone dying because Lestat died. Which was kind of nice, in a way. I suppose that made it more appropriate for the final book in the series, for the events in that book to take place. But I kind of felt like it was a good thing to have because he had like this one severe weakness that the vampires had, aside from, you know, not going out in the light of the sun. Can we talk about how much of an idiot Rashomandis is? In all seriousness, he's a bona fide asshole and idiot, and that guy just can't let go of a grudge, man. In all seriousness, even after Lestat pardoned him multiple times, said he's allowed at court, and all that jazz, he's like, oh, I must get my revenge on Lestat for whatever reason. And it's like, that guy, that, like, one of the dumbest villains ever. And the whole thing where he's like, Lestat is about to kill him, and he's like, that was not supposed to happen. It was not supposed to be like this. Clearly, this guy didn't know Lestat as well as he thought, or else he would have understood why Lestat did what he did. But here's the thing, Lestat, as we know, has always done his own thing. All the time, regardless of what other people thought. It was only while he had the core within himself, for the short few years that he had it, where the vampires are like, where he's like, you know, I can't just do anything I want anymore, because if I do, I could kill everybody. But like, if Rashomandis had just gone and said, hey, I abducted these people, I'm keeping them hostage, we need to negotiate something, that would have been one thing. But he goes and pretends that he burned them to ash in order to make Lestat suffer, which wasn't necessary for a number of reasons. And, like, he was just perpetuating his own suffering. Everything that happened to himself was his own fault, more or less, with the exception of his deception by Amel. But everything else just spiraled out from that. And he's a prime example, in my mind, that that's an extreme of what can happen if you don't let go of something, right? If you just let it rot within you and it just eats away at you until you can't stand it anymore. And then the death of his fledgling Benedict, which Benedict chose his own demise. It was not Lestat's fault. It was Benedict's choice. But Rosh was like, nope, this is another thing I'm going to peg on Lestat, and no one can stop me. Not a one. I'm glad that guy died, man. I'm glad he made the miscalculations he did and he died, because he was pissing me off. Before I get to the final point, there's another one I want to throw in here, which I had in the original video, and that is bringing science into a formerly purely paranormal series. I'm not opposed to it, alright? But I feel like there was trying to be too much of a scientific justification for certain things that I didn't really feel needed it. Like, oh my gosh, Victor. Lestat has a son. Did you know that? His name is Victor. And because science. What? Like, don't get me wrong. Victor's an okay character, but the purpose that he served in Prince Lestat could have easily been done by someone else who already existed. Why did we need to have a biological son for Lestat via science? I feel like that was completely unnecessary. Also, I feel like Rose was completely unnecessary. But at least reading her stuff was more interesting than reading about that girl in The Queen of the Damned who only lived in one chapter and then had pointless references throughout the rest of the book. It's a bit more than that at least, but still doesn't make me feel any better about it. The only reason why I didn't tack the existence of Victor and Rose onto a negative about Prince Lestat was because of the fact that overall they were just written better as characters and their origin tales were written better, so I could ignore it And like the whole scientific thing too also connects to Atlantis, because that was like a super advanced scientific paradise. Again, if it wasn't for Amell, why would they need to be connected? Like, trying to find scientific justifications for stuff that was purely paranormal in the series, and we accepted it as paranormal. We as readers accepted it, okay? Trying to find a justification for those when there wasn't originally something there to begin with? Not exactly the greatest of retcons. Not in my mind. It's different if you had it from the get-go. Like those vampire books, including the one I'm writing, where there is scientific stuff that's justifiable by science in there from the get-go. Then you've seeded something there. You have something there. But to take the Vampire Chronicles, strictly paranormal stuff, and shoehorn it in, I didn't exactly feel like that was a good call. Honestly, it's easily forgettable and not touched on as much as it probably should have in order to make it feel more like it belonged. Does that make any sense? Let's talk about the characters that survived and those that didn't. Maharet, Macaire, and Cayman, all dead. Akasha and Enkill, of course, all dead. All the ones that matter, Lestat, Louis, Marius, Armand, David Talbot, Amell, Gabrielle, Magnus still lives as a spirit, so I guess he counts, and some other people that I can't remember the names of that were assumed to be dead earlier on in the series, but were revealed to still be alive in Prince Lestat and the Realms of Atlantis, and in turn are still alive by the end of Blood Communion. So there's a lot more people who are still alive than those that perished, which is good. I'm really disappointed that Mona and Quinn died. I was kind of hoping they would survive, but they didn't. I'm a little broken about that. Rushamandes died, of course. Good riddance. Benedict died. Good riddance. Founders of the Talamasca are still alive, so to speak, including Graham, who's now stuck in his particle body and not able to leave, so he has to get the Replomoids for help. That's something we won't see because the series is over, but, you know, good luck on him about that, I guess. Regardless of how I think about how certain things in the series turned out, overall, The Vampire Chronicles is a rather interesting package, and a very interesting one to read and experience and dissect. And if you made it to the end of this video, I'm really thrilled about that. I'm glad you could come along this journey with me of reading The Vampire Chronicles from start to finish, and then discussing all these wonderful, juicy spoilers with you. If there's anything that I have not mentioned, or maybe I've said wrongly, because it's been a bit, I might have forgotten some stuff, feel free to plug them in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts on this stuff. And yeah, thank you for watching this video, and I will talk to you later. Bye!